Welcome, everyone. I'll start at my far left and introduce everyone to you. So the far left is David Swenson, who is an Ashtanga teacher and has been practicing and teaching Ashtanga yoga for 4 decades. Next to him, Gary Kraftsow is a long-term practitioner in the style of Desikachar, and he founded the American Viniyoga Institute. He's also been practicing for 4 decades. And next to him is Ana Forrest, the founder of Forrest Yoga. And immediately to my left is William Broad, who is the author of The Science of Yoga, and who started this great, very public debate about injuries in the yoga world with a New York Times article that I'm guessing many of you read called How Yoga Can Wreck Your Body. I'm just curious how many people did read that. Just about everyone. The purpose of this panel is really going to be to talk about some of the nuances of yoga and injury, but I think before we get started, because your article did bring up a fair amount of reaction in the yoga community, that we should address just a little bit. There's statistics of how many people go to the emergency room for yoga injuries, but it's less than 50 per year at the high point in the data that you have, which is old because there is no more recent data. But again, with 20 million people practicing, 50 injuries doesn't seem like a crisis to me. And I also felt like some of the case studies from my perspective, someone who's going to sit in Vajrasana for an hour a day or fall asleep in Paschimottanasana, which would be quite an incredible feat for me. But I wonder, is that really, that doesn't seem like yoga practice as the common practitioner practices it. So I kind of want to address where the idea came from for feeling that yoga is injurious on a large scale. And seriously injurious, because we're also talking stroke and... Right.
Let me speak to some of your specifics, because I don't, it's more of an impression based on the consumer product safety studies, right? That gives you the feeling that that the injury rate is rising a lot because yoga is popular. A lot more people are doing it, but it's those surveys aren't numbers; they're statistical sampling. So it's not like there's 50 people being admitted to emergency rooms. It's like in this electronic database that they have where they measure admissions. It goes from whatever to whatever to whatever. That's a sample. That's a statistical sample, and it doesn't give you a true reading for how many people are being injured. In fact, one of the huge difficulties for me in writing the book was getting the data. There's not that much quality science that's done that studies yoga. I mean, the pharmaceutical companies aren't going to do it. The federal government is just getting into it a teeny-weeny little bit. As I say in the epilogue, last year the National Institutes of Health spent $7 million. By Washington standards, that's nothing, right? So where do you get data? There's not a whole lot. I've gotten 3 stroke letters, from people who were doing yoga. This one happened last year, and I'm just going to read it real quick. You know what the cerebellum is? It's this little tennis ball-sized thing at the back of your brain which governs fine motor movement and is really central to yoga because it's what lets us do all these intricate body things. And unfortunately, when these strokes happen, the cerebellum is often the place where it hits. The result was that I suffered a serious stroke in the cerebellum. This left me on the bathroom floor, thrashing around in a pool of my own vomit, crying for help. I was fortunately rushed to the hospital. The end result was lots of physical therapy to learn to balance and walk again, double vision, and some loss of hearing in my left ear. Prior to this, I had gone to a few yoga classes. This guy's a newbie. But never once was I aware that practicing yoga could cause serious injuries. Although I feel I've made a good recovery, this incident has ruined my life, both physically and emotionally. Thank you for making everyone aware of the dangers. I don't want to hype this. No one that I know of knows the frequency of these kinds of injuries. I think they are probably extremely low There's this huge population of people, as you know better than I, out there doing this stuff. And if these happen, it's happening at a rate that is almost imperceptible. Nonetheless, it's happening, and the consequences can be very high. I regret that, in a way, that this became the main feature that everybody glommed onto in the book, because I see more benefits than dangers. I did yoga this morning. I'll do yoga tomorrow morning. I've been doing it for 42 years. I think everybody basically should be doing it because the benefits are so indisputably great. But these are serious injury issues. And this type of stroke called that starts as a vertebral dissection, you can't prove this. Has anybody been killed by doing this? You can't prove it. But for this type of problem, 1 in 20 of the people who suffer that dissection and a stroke die, about 5%, a little less than 5%, they estimate. So, these are serious issues. So let's see, I think,
well,
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
I guess I have one more question about the data, and then I want to turn it over to all
Sure.
these other panelists. And that is, if it's the case, because you say in the book, maybe it's 30 fatalities annually. Like when you
do the math.
Do the
right.
math. You say maybe it was 30 fatalities annually, and this is from these vertebral artery
Dissections, right.
dissections
Right.
Causing strokes that can result in fatalities. 30 fatalities annually, maybe 300 over a decade. Globally, the fatalities might number in the thousands. Mm-hmm. So when I read that, I thought, why would we not have heard of really a single one until we read your article? Like,
because it is hard science. I mean,
they are hard to prove, or hard. What do you mean by hard science?
Because people routinely don't undergo autopsies, right? In order to make causation is the hardest thing in science. What caused that? Science is very good at describing things, right? And to be able to say that's also part of the very first literature on this. And I was criticized for this in the run-up through the literature. The first thing is a letter, right? And the guy's saying, well, it's very hard to get the causal connection because oftentimes the stroke doesn't happen for 12 hours. It's true in beauty parlor syndrome, where little old ladies have their heads back and the same kind of thing happens. They'll have a stroke, between 12, 24, maybe 36 hours later, and causation, who's to say why they had that stroke? So it's a very, very difficult thing to say.
More specifically, and there's other things about your book that are quite problematic, and let's not go there yet, perhaps. But, you just mentioned this idea of causality. I have a question, which is, how do we know whether that person would or wouldn't have had a stroke anyway for other reasons? And wait, let me finish.
That's a huge issue.
Yeah,
right.
And I agree with you that causality is an extremely difficult thing. And
Just,
so to base research, and you also suggest that there isn't a lot of research, and I'm just one person in our organization is filled with people with letters after their name. I have psychiatrists, medical doctors, physical therapists, occupational therapists, every profession, healthcare profession in my student body, and they've read your studies, and we have 4 pages of errors. I told you that, right? So, but
I'm eager to see them.
Yeah, but the point is that there is real research, like, if National Institute of Health is serious science, and what about Aetna? You haven't researched the research that we've been doing for decades on the effectiveness of yoga therapy. So I think there's a little misrepresentation there. Bottom line is...
Can I just address one thing before we go
Well,
away?
the bottom line for me is just, let me just
go
finish
ahead.
this, and then I have nothing more to say on this point, is causality is difficult. So we don't know. In fact, I believe that I know that there are serious injuries from yoga practice, and we're in agreement about that. I don't think the problem is the yoga. I think it's the perspective of the practitioner. And then the other piece of it is that we just don't know whether those strokes... There was a woman in LA, did you know this story, that she rolled out her mat and died of an embolism before the class started. So, and she was a healthy, potent woman. I don't know if anybody knows about this. Yoga works, actually. And she was an heiress, and there's all kinds of speculation. But if the class had started and she died of an embolism, that's the kind of evidence that would feed into the kind of sort of sensational article that you wrote. But she died as she was rolling out her mat. Thank God for the teacher. Can you imagine what they would have felt? So we just really don't know the cause of a lot of these conditions.
Right. So mat rolling could be fatal.
What is... Brilliant.
What I've noticed, having been teaching for about 4 decades, like my friends here, is that we humans have a lot of problems. And we've gotten very much stuck in our head, and we are totally clueless about our body. So when we start moving our body, we do things that hurt it in the process of hopefully coming into it, and unless we're taught how to come into it, a lot of us stay kind of locked out. And so we start exercising in order to maintain health or to maintain our weight or to maintain our vanity, and yet we have been taught since a very early age how to be disconnected. Is it any wonder we get hurt? One of my most serious injuries that happened to me was in a restaurant sitting in a chair. Life has injuries. One of the reasons I created Forrest Yoga was to create a system where we could become intelligent and basically go on vision quest about how to heal ourselves and how to empower ourselves. So when Bill and I were talking about this, it's like we're so out of knowing how to track and feel in our body. We get hurt. And can we use these practices in a good way? Yes, we can use anything in a stupid way, and as humans we do. But this is like a call for all of us to pull up our intelligence and start putting that into play. Does that mean that yoga is right or wrong? It's actually neither. Can we bring our intelligence into these practices to benefit ourselves and to evolve ourselves, including when we do something stupid like herniated disc from running? This is what we were talking about earlier. That was him. And then learning how to use, like I've created a bunch of poses specifically to heal disc injuries. This can be a healing road. And sometimes getting injured is part of the healing road. And it's an important thing to recognize that there is this unconsciousness, this disconnect that so many of us have. And that if we made more of an effort to learn how to live in our body and to track kinesthetically what's happening, we'll know when we're on the road to tweaking something or when we're on the road to healing, because they feel different. So, and one reason that I'm quite happy to be sitting on this panel is because I think it's a great wake-up call. It's like, let's look at this. Let's use, whether it's Vini Yoga or Ashtanga or Forrest Yoga or whatever we're doing, let's use it to get wiser. And wake up.
You know, to me, one of my issues was like reading about this woman falling asleep in Paschimottanasana, this case, was I say that how could that be yoga? If yoga is an awareness practice and you're falling asleep, then clearly she wasn't practicing yoga. She fell asleep in a posture that's associated with yoga. It's not the practice. So beyond bringing awareness, I wonder if these master teachers that have all been teaching so long have any words of wisdom about not injuring yourself.
My belief is that yoga can only be perceived through what I would call experiential perception. Practicing yoga is like eating pizza. You could read volumes about pizza, study the history of pizza making, Chicago pizza, New York pizza, right, all that stuff. But until you taste it, you really don't know what it is. So it's important to have the taste of yoga. Now, how it is presented, every teacher is an individual. A teacher shouldn't represent a system either. Like with anything, there's good teachers, bad teachers. Yoga, there are people who wield yoga like a weapon and beat people over the head with it. And there are students who take themselves and they flog themselves with yoga. If someone beats themselves up with yoga, my mind is like this. Yoga is a tool. It's like a hammer sitting here on the table. If I pick up a hammer and start slamming it down on my thumb, I can't say, wow, look how bad hammers are. Look what they do to your thumb. Or if I whack somebody else on the head, they can't look and say, wow, hammers are horrible. Look what that hammer did. Right? So the goal of a teacher is to encourage, inspire, and facilitate practice of a student, to teach them how to use the tool and to develop their own life, their own journey, and to be irresponsible and to use a tool incorrectly. You can't then blame it on the tool. So to instill responsibility in the student, I think it's important also for a teacher to create thinking students. It's another mistake, I believe, for teachers to put themselves in. You never can question them. You don't ask anything. They're the authority. You do, and that just causes problems. I think it's good to get their opinion and understand that they have the responsibility to practice the yoga in such a way that you feel good. David Williams, who was my first Ashtanga teacher, who's a guy from North Carolina. He hadn't lived in there 40 years. He still talks like that. But he distills it down to this. He says, you can tell if you're doing your yoga right by seeing how you feel about 7 o'clock at night. If you feel like you've been dragged behind a truck, you're doing something wrong. All right, so I believe that we don't even need science to tell us that we feel good. Right? I don't need to be a biochemist to eat an orange and understand everything that happens when I eat that orange. I don't have to know that if I swallow this orange incorrectly, I could choke and die. I just need to know I peel the orange, I chew it up, it tastes great, I swallow it. So as a teacher, we present the yoga to people, present it with integrity, sincerity, let them use the tool, and like teaching a child to ride a bicycle, you don't have to teach from fear and have them totally freaked out that, oh my God, I could ride, I could die. You want to let them experience, but don't let them ride on a busy road. So that's it.
I, talk about Iyengar and blankets and blocks and trying to tailor, the pose to the person, then the person to the pose. But I had no idea that there are schools, individuals, styles. I had no idea. There are 3 books, count them, 3 books written on yoga injury. And each book is trying to be constructive. One of them is in French. My French isn't that good. I haven't read it. But they are proposing ways to do this more intelligently so that you don't get injured and that you have a better yoga practice. That the groundswell of positive, constructive reformers, as I would call it, blew me away because it was total. I knew a little bit, but I had no idea the depth and breadth of it. And to me, that's great news because it means yoga is evolving just like everything else.
I got a letter from one of my friends who said, Gary, this guy wrote this article. You've been saying this for decades. The fault isn't the system, it isn't the tool. The hammer and metaphor is beautiful. It's the relationship to the practice. And what makes it yoga is you're transforming your relationship to your life at every level and all of your action. Postures are a great opportunity to begin to experience that qualitative relationship that makes you feel better. If you're doing the right practice, you'll be more stable, you'll feel better, you'll get sick less, you'll be less attached to things, you'll be less irritable, you'll be more tolerant of others, and you'll be more careful about what you say in public so that you don't irritate people. Okay? But you did a service by, and I told you that when I first met you last night, you did a service by bringing this issue out. It's an important issue. Yoga is not about injury. Injury happens in anything. But if you bring your intelligence, as Ana said, to your practice, you can use these tools to really transform your life in a very beautiful way.
Also, I'd like to bring up what this started out with was causality, what causes things. And one of my students, I remember saying that she did this major shoulder injury because she reached up on this shelf to grab something. And so therefore it was that movement, and it was like, no. It's what have you been doing for at least the last number of years that sets you up that this area is so tweaky and unsupported. And so when we are looking at these things or we get injured, can you get curious to begin to study what sets you up for this? And then begin to correct it. Like, do you sit like this most of the day and you wonder why your yoga hasn't healed your back pain? It's like you do your yoga for an hour or 2 hours, if you're really doing well, a day, and then for 14 or 15 hours, you're sitting all curled up. It's like your poor back and guts. So can you begin to get really curious about tracking how do you get the energy to run in your body? How do you get things to work in a congruent way internally? Because it's very mysterious, and that whole journey is literally like a quest of self-discovery. And injuries can do that. I use the practice to teach that. This is a process of self-discovery. And the yoga poses are this fascinating arena to make that discovery.
I mean, the image of yoga, if you had to summarize it in a sentence, is yoga is very old, it's ancient, and it tends to be more or less perfect. I mean, that's the imagery, and that's often how it's sold.
Well, how
And
about chiropractics?
You know, that's why when
But our chiropractics are also presented as something beneficial, right? How many people here have been to a chiropractor? My mother went to a chiropractor and had 6 ribs broken by the chiropractor. 6 ribs broken at the chiropractor.
Right.
Right? My nephew was making onion rings and spilled a pot of hot oil on his leg, and he's in the hospital. So you could become so paranoid that you can't even step out of bed. So in a way, that it's sensationalizing something that we know, yeah, there's risk in anything.
I disagree.
When it's used
Wait, I take
incorrectly.
umbrage at the word sensationalized, because the dying or suffering brain damage that people are generally not aware of is not sensationalism. Those are medical facts. These are respected people at Northwestern, at various medical schools around the country writing about this stuff. Is it sensationalism to put that in a book and try to convey it clearly with every ounce of objectivity and fairness that I can muster? I don't think so. I think arguably that headline was sensational. I'm not criticizing the editors and the people who came up with it, but I was shocked. And to me, it was like, doing a disservice to the issue and maybe to the book, because people got this image that I'm a yoga basher, when I think basically we should all, get thee to a yoga studio and do more. It's good stuff.
But I'm just saying but bicycle injuries
So don't use that word sensationalize, okay? Because it's a fighting word. Now I'm going to come after you afterwards.
But it is to me. I mean, you can't say don't use it,
yes,
because
no,
to
go
me,
ahead,
I think
use it
it's
all you want.
sensational.
Right.
I think it's sensationalized because I've been doing yoga for
I
43 years.
I respectfully disagree.
I have never had an injury from practicing yoga in my life, ever. I didn't mean any of this as a personal attack on you either. I'm just responding to a book and perceptions and so forth. And we're just having a discussion, and it's okay. People can have differences of opinions. I think it's healthy to have differences of opinions and talk about it and discuss it. That's an illusion of yoga, is that everybody has to think exactly the same, and it's just, it's not like that. It's okay, and it brings life. And honestly, I think answers are overrated. There's juice in life in questions, and when we think we know it all, there's nothing left to learn. Right? So it is important that you bring up these questions and to look and explore and bring energy, and it makes people more aware, which is a healthy thing. So it's nothing personal. We're just having a discussion.
I realize. It's just that I've worked at the New York Times since 1963, and when people say you've sensationalized something, that's a serious charge. I mean, we will, the editors, we will be raked over the coals, and at times when it's found that we will be punished or run whole. I helped do a 9-month investigation of our own sensationalistic reporting about the intelligence before the Iraq War, right? And the paper is a big grown-up organization, and we laid out in a series of stories how our reporting had sensationalized it. It's like one of the most serious charges you can level at a journalist or a science journalist. So that's why when you said that, I started going bonkers, right?
But good, now I know your button.
Exactly, this is it, everybody. Press right here.
There are great yogis in India who never practice asana, just if you didn't know that. Asana is an important part of yoga, but it's only a small part of yoga. And yoga is the key word here, not exercise. And asana is not exercise, it's part of yoga. And thank you. And yoga, thank you. And yoga postures are not about the postures. They're about the practitioner. And teachers shouldn't be teaching postures. They should be teaching people who are practicing the postures. And so my primary objection, besides I think that you did a great disservice to a professional organization that is not doing what you said they're doing, and you need to reinform yourself, which is International Association of Yoga Therapists. Whoever founded it is a separate topic. The organization is working hard to educate the public, and they're not credentialing anyone, and that's not what they're about. So, that one I have some real issues with.
Let's talk.
But that's a separate topic. The real issue for me is that our job as teachers should be to educate, and trainers of teachers, to train teachers that when you're working with asana, They're tools to serve the bodies of the practitioners. They're not external forms that the whole purpose of the practitioner is to strive to master them. That's where the injuries come from. Not just Ashtanga, Vinaya Yoga too, any system of practice or Forest Yoga, it's not the system, it's the relationship. And what makes it yoga is your relationship to your practice. You should shift, my view is that people should shift their perspective. When they're practicing asana, they're using the asanas as tools to discover what's going on in their body, as Anna said, very intelligently and wisely. Bring your intelligence to the practice and forget about mastering the postures as much as understanding how the posture can serve you to understand and transform your bodies. And the teachers shouldn't be teaching postures. They should be teaching people and learn how to see how the postures can work to help someone create more structural integrity, and when you go into deeper yoga, how to create sympathetic, parasympathetic regulation, and how to balance your emotions and clarify your mind and find out what you're here for and discover a meaning in life before it's over, which is coming very quickly. I know it's coming quicker when you're doing headstand, according to William.
No, that's just thoracic outlet syndrome. You don't die. Look at how these vertebrae had been evolved over millions and millions of years, so big at the bottom, getting smaller, 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 and then when you go into headstand, you're doing this, putting all that weight on an area that was designed to carry about 10 pounds in your head. And he said, if you do that every day, you will get injured.
With headstand, personally, I'm not fond of that pose, but I love handstands and forearm balances, and that's what I teach, is other forms of inversions that create a lengthening and a decompression of the spine. With headstand, I don't teach that to people who've been practicing with me for less than a few years, because we need to build up the strength in the upper back and the chest to be able to hold a spaciousness in the spinal cord in the pose, like keeping the bones off of each other and not settling. And for the amount of time that it takes, I prefer to prepare people through forearm balance and handstand on the wall or dolphin on the wall, these poses that do immediate benefit to the neck and to the brain, to the nervous system, and to the spine.
I saw Pattabhi Jois work with a quadriplegic boy. His family would lie him on the floor. He couldn't move anything but his head. Pattabhi Jois would take his body, move him into a posture, and say, you do breathing. 1, 2, again you do, left side. And he would hold his body in the shape of an asana and have him breathe. So just like anything, and what we've been talking about up here, it's a tool. Used incorrectly, bad adjustments are bad, good adjustments are good, but the fact that somebody gets hurt from an adjustment does not mean adjustments are bad. My mother was hurt from a chiropractor. I was going to go and kill the guy. I mean, I was like upset. She was 84 years old, and he just cracked her ribs. But it was my mother who was the yogi. He said, look, it's not going to change anything anyway. But my point is, it doesn't mean chiropractics is bad. It means there was a bad chiropractor. So in proper hands, it's a good thing.
There are a lot of injuries from uneducated but well-intended yoga teachers who are adjusting their students. In our tradition, adjustment isn't about moving the body, it's about moving awareness. So there are more light touches to move awareness than to move the body. If you're adjusting your people using your bodily force, you're not really serving them. You might be serving your ego or something, but you be careful because your insurance policy won't cover that if you're sued.
I was born crippled. I was paralyzed again in '93. I've had a huge amount of injuries that I came into yoga with, because I used to train horses, and they're kind of big creatures when they get irate. And for someone who couldn't walk very well and couldn't bend very well and was plagued by migraines and epilepsy, what I can do with my body through my yoga practice is a miracle. And so when I do a demo, it's to share that miracle, like this is possible and this is the dance of my spirit. And you could take it to demean yourself, like, oh, I can't do that. Or you could take it in the, at least for me, in the spirit that it's offered, which is, look at what's possible. And why don't you use this to find out what can you do year after year after year, because that's how I'd love you to learn about it.